Good evening. This is a second in a series of two webinars helping parents with the process of letting go of young adults. This one will shift into a little bit of a deeper dive around complicated situations that parents face with young adults. So we're going to take a little closer look at some of those kinds of challenging situations. So let me bring up the PowerPoint, which I'll go through. I'm entitling this the application of love and backbone to complicated situations. The first webinar is available on my parentslettinggo.com website under resources, and this one will be posted shortly within the next, I would say, the second week of March. So you'll have this available as well. Just as a little bit of review on the presentation I did from a few weeks ago, we kind of went around the circle describing the practices that parents need to strengthen in order to kind of prepare the nest or prepare the launch pad for the young adult to leave. It starts with understanding and unconditional love. Those are kind of fundamental. If you don't have the foundation of love and efforts to understand and connect and relate to the young adult, it's going to be hard to do anything else around this circle. The next two practices, apology and forgiveness, are really healing practices. And these are practices that are relevant when there's hurt, trauma, pain, suffering, disconnects, things that have gone wrong in the relationship up to the time of launch and need to be addressed through one or the other of these types of practices. The third and the fourth and the fifth ones have to do with setting the stage for letting go. Supportive integrity is really about parenting young adults with backbone and love. So this is where we go from love to bring a stronger sense of backbone into the process. And it creates a kind of a firmness that the young adult can push against that helps them clarify who they are and then helps them with the launching process. The last one is really kind of a grieving stage of the whole process where you really have to let go and move on to a separate life, in terms of the future of the relationship. But we're gonna do a little deeper dive, as I said earlier, into supportive integrity. So here are some of the factors that influence our success as parents in being able to let go of our young adults. Probably the first thing is just that. Can we let go? Or do we need to kind of hang on for a variety of reasons that we'll discuss in a few minutes? Are we able to change our behavior in ways that improve our ability to emancipate the young adult? There's a little discussion we'll have about parenting style. What's the best parenting style to be able to launch the young adult? We'll talk about parental integrity. This is really, I could call it parental backbone. This is how you establish a sense of firmness in your relationship with your young adult. Talk a little bit about healing our wounds to set the stage for launching. And then finally, the ability to customize our approach to, relative to some complications that we'll end up talking about later on. These could be mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, or other kinds of things like that. So let's talk about parenting style to start with. This comes from the work of Diana Baumrin, who is a well-known researcher, quite a long time ago, but she established a understanding of different types of parenting that has stood the test of time. That these parenting approaches seem to be either creating problems for parents in their relationship with their children, or they seem to be supportive of the children's natural development process. In the upper left-hand corner here is the authoritarian approach, and this is one of high control and low warmth. This is, uh, uh, I'm the boss. What I say goes. Don't ask why. I'm telling you, I'm the authority on. I'm the authority on this. Down below is the permissive parent. A lot of low control and low warmth. These are kids that typically kids in this type of parenting situation will often just be kind of able to do whatever they want to do because there's no real connection between the parents. The approach that she argues is the most effective is over to the right, authoritative, which is high warmth and low control. Now, obviously, over time, that the control is going to become less and less important. Early on, there's probably some good reasons for more control. When you have a toddler, you don't want the toddler to go out onto the streets. You grab the toddler. But as they get older, a parent needs to be able to show less and less control. She did not talk about this other quadrant specifically, but I would call this the over-involved quadrant, which is the upper right. And that's the helicopter parent who is high warmth and high control. This is the parent that goes into their son or daughter's college professor to argue about the grades that the student has received. So what does it mean to let go? We're going to shift to talking about what it means to let go. In this case, we're talking about particularly within the Western culture, letting go means the person needs to move out of a dependent living situation. So that means they need to be able to have income. They need to be able to be operating independently. I've argued that whether you're at home or not is not the critical factor on whether you're differentiated or responsibly independent, because you could be living at home, paying rent, helping out with food, cooking dinners, doing your wash, going to work every day. And I would think that would be fine. That person would be viewed as responsibly independent. And in fact, in many cultures, you have 3 generations living together. So this a second letting go process is let go of control and move into more of a consulting and coaching role. So as the adolescent gets older and moves into young adulthood, the parent needs to shift from a very directive approach to parenting to more of a consulting. Here's some things you need to think about, son or daughter, but you have to make the decision. Then we have to let go of some of these binding emotions that keep us negatively connected to our young adult: guilt, shame, regret. We need to let go of our responsibility for the young adult and understand that we have a responsibility to our young adult. So 4 means that we're accepting the responsibility for what they do, and ultimately they have to accept that responsibility. That we can't take that responsibility on. But as parents, we do have some responsibility to them. And then I think we need to let go of our dreams for our kids that may not be their dreams. A good friend of mine and colleague has described the 3 situations that parents seem to have in terms of a view of their child. And that is that they start with a fantasy. We all start with a fantasy view of our child, of what this child is going to be and become. And then we go to the actual view which is often not, it doesn't match that picture of what we fantasized our child would be. And then he talks about a third stage is where we get to the good enough young adult. I'm not as comfortable with that descriptor. I would probably say an okay young adult. If we get to a place where how's your son or daughter doing? Well, they're doing okay, and it may not be exactly our fantasy occupation or what we thought they'd do or become, but they're okay. It's a good goal to shoot for. And then let go by staying loving. Some parents seem to kind of feel like they've got to get angry and distant and back away to kind of push their young adult out the door. And I'd argue that that is exactly the opposite of what you need to do. You need to lovingly help them move out the door of their dependency on you. And finally, we need to let go of the past. It's no longer the family that we have known, because now it's time to move on and reconstruct the family without that person in it. Okay, so let me just mention a few things here that connect to the concept of high control and high warmth. In a situation where you have high control and high warmth, that's the over-involved parent. You often have a positively enmeshed kind of relationship between the young adult and the parent. And this is one where the young adult can't make a decision without the parent's input, or fears making a decision because the parent might be upset or not agree or affirm the decision. In the high control, low warmth, there's a lot of antagonism. That's typically the negatively meshed. There's a strong emotional connection, but it's more around the negative emotions and negative feelings. The disconnected one is the more permissive. That's the kind of outcome that would typically show up with a permissive situation where there's really no connection emotionally and no control. And finally, the healthy situation is where there is continued love and connection, but real separation and respect for the autonomy of the young adult. So how do we undermine emancipation? There's things that we do that can help or hurt our young adults in the process of letting go. So one is depend on our adult children to make us happy or proud. You know, sometimes we impose our unfulfilled interests, desires, fantasies about what we were going to become, and we put those on our children, and they need to make us proud by accomplishing various things. I think as a generation, us as boomers and Gen X parents are much more invested in the success of our children than our parents were in us. We can overprotect. That's the helicopter parent. We can feel guilty, and then we don't say no because we've done something in the past that was harmful, or we feel guilty about, and so then we can't present a firm position to our young adults. Sometimes we vicariously live through them. That's again pushing our kind of needs into them. Sometimes we enable them to please them, to give in. We don't want them to be mad at us, so we'll end up doing things for them or saying things and supporting things that they want to do that maybe are not consistent with their values. Sometimes we want to avoid conflict or tough decisions, so we'll just ignore things that are going on that are, again, in conflict with some of our values. We'll make excuses for our young adults. Well, they had a hard childhood, they had ADHD, they had this or that, or that. So we have to kind of not hold them as responsible as maybe we should. Sometimes we try to be fair versus doing what's right. Sometimes our young adults will complain, well, you gave, my brother this or my sister, how come you're not giving this to me? Sometimes young adults will use that kind of argument. Sometimes we threaten, bribe, or verbally attack. Bribing is basically, I'll give you this money if you go do such and such. And then we're kind of shocked when they take the money, but they don't do what they said they were going to do. And we compromise our values or principles. Back to the model, too much warmth, caring, nurturance, or too much control, too hard a backbone and rigidity can lead to launch problems. So what's parental integrity? What is this thing called backbone? And here are my definitions of parental integrity or backbone: being true to your word, keeping your promises. If you said something, then you need to stick to it. Modeling those values and standards. If you want honesty and truthfulness from your young adult, and you're not able to or willing to demonstrate that and express those values, it's going to be hard to expect that from your young adult. Deciding and acting on what is right, not what is convenient, easy, likely to not get a negative reaction, but back to what we believe is right. We use the overall way of approaching our young adults is to decide whether what we're doing is the loving thing to do and the right thing to do. So honesty, telling the truth, lean in and face the reality, face issues, be honest with your frustrations and be open with your young adult, and love them with guidelines and consequences. So love is, unconditional love is not the same as unconditional approval. So those are two different things. Just briefly, the value of saying no. This is a little bit of repeat of what I discussed in an earlier webinar, but understand that no is not a four-letter word. It's an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for strengthening the young adult. It pushes the young adult to step up and take responsibility. You can often, by saying no, tap into a deeper reserve and resilience in the young adult. It sends a message, you can do it. And it can be the most empowering thing that you can do as a parent. Even though they may not be happy about it. It's not about whether they're happy or not, but whether they take advantage of our demonstrating backbone in a way that helps them to grow and become more responsibly independent. Rules to guide your decisions: act from love, not fear, anxiety, anger, resentment. Always ask yourself, if this is the position I'm taking, is this out of love? Don't do something that they can do for themselves. I think that's generally a good rule of thumb. Require them to meet you halfway. Require them to first deliver on an expectation. That's the difference between bribery and reinforcement of behavior. Partner and brainstorm on solutions. Pick your battles. Not everything has to be a power struggle. Let some things ride and pick the more important issues to put your stake in the ground. And avoid triangles and good cop, bad cop kinds of approaches that sometimes parents can get into. In fact, I'd say, maybe as many as half of the parents that I see seem to have gotten themselves into a place where one tends to be quite nurturing and the other tends to be quite firm. And, the tendency then is for the parent who's firm to view the nurturing parent as too soft and need to kind of be tougher on the young adult. And then when the nurturing parent sees the more strict parent being too harsh, they then coddle or try to be more nurturing. And each parent has to bring together love and backbone. And so parents need to work together to have an integrated approach where you both bring love and backbone to the situation. So all these things apply whether we're talking about complicated situations or a more kind of garden variety type of challenge of a young adult needing to move out on their own. So here's where healing and with apology and forgiveness come into play. In the positively enmeshed situation, a parent may need to just apologize for being too over controlling, and needs to be able to. I'm sorry. I've been trying to run your life too much. I need to back off, and I'm going to work harder on that. In the negatively enmeshed situation, there may be a need to apologize for something that you as a parent had done in the past that you feel has triggered this antagonistic relationship or resentment on the part of your young adult. And sometimes, parents are so angry at their young adult that they need to work on forgiveness. Because if you have that kind of resentment, anger, it will bind you to that young adult. It will keep that relationship bound, and the young adult won't be able to let go, and you as a parent won't be able to let go either. Forgiveness is the route to letting go in that situation. The disconnected one, again, it could be an issue of apology. This is probably one of the more disheartening situations that you can have, where I've got at least a couple parents right now whose young adult has cut them off completely from any communication or any contact. And in at least in one case, the reason for that is totally unknown. I mean, it's very puzzling. And both of these parents are just suffering with a lack of connection to their young adults. And both have made efforts to try to communicate, to try to apologize for anything that they've done that may have contributed to this alienation. But it's really, really a very heartbreaking situation. And then finally, healthy separation, where you're bringing the love and you're bringing also your values and your backbone into the situation. So apology, briefly, just taking responsibility. It reduces the blame of the parent. Once you've apologized, there's less pressure therefore or less tendency for the young adult to maintain that resentment. You're showing willingness to be vulnerable, and that, because relationships are inherently reciprocal, that then kind of allows for vulnerability to occur back from the young adult. And it demonstrates a desire to say, I'm wrong. I want this relationship to be good. I'm trying to repair this relationship. Forgiveness of ourselves for past failures. I think that's really important, to practice self-forgiveness. And we need to forgive our kids. So for both parents and young adults, forgiveness is the route to reconciliation. Apology and forgiveness are the routes to reconciliation, and they have the power to transform the relationship. All right, let's talk about some of the challenges with young adults. So we're going to talk about being stuck at home, kind of a contentious, demanding relationship, alienation, and then some of these complicating factors, such as physical disability, mental health, or substance abuse concerns. So we have a young adult at home, and my approach with a young adult who needs to kind of be thinking about moving on with their life toward a more direction of more responsible independence is to come up with a 5-year plan. Ask them to come up with that, and then be able to kind of position the parent and the young adult looking in the same direction, rather than kind of in a contentious banging heads place. Sit together and look out 5 years, and then talk about what the young adult needs to do to get to that 5-year plan, and what the parent can do to help the young adult get to that 5-year plan. I guess it's a way of getting everybody on the same page, working together. There is a blog that, 2 blogs on the website, one on 5-year plan and one on vision, where you can look at the specifics of how to use this 5-year plan approach. I think it's important to understand the underlying need and developmental task. Typically, young adults who are kind of stuck at home are not feeling particularly good about themselves. That's not where they want to be. And sometimes just getting a job can be a big step in the direction of gaining a greater sense of independence and dealing with maybe the guilt or shame of being stuck and being at home. I had one young adult who was anxious about going out and applying for jobs because they didn't like to be rejected. And the sleep pattern of this young adult was all over the place. I, in fact, sent him to a sleep specialist, a psychologist, and I think it was a friend of his mother's came and talked to him about a job with the city, and actually recruited him. And he got in the job, liked it, the people liked working with him, and lo and behold, his sleep all once got in place because he had to get up in the morning, and his whole attitude changed just by feeling like he's worth something, he has value. So sometimes it's just getting a job, getting that young adult to feel like they have some independence can be extremely important. I think it's important to establish guidelines. I talk to parents about make a list of what you'll do and what you won't do. Make a list of what the deal breakers are. If the young adult's going to live at home, they cannot carry out certain behaviors like bringing drugs into the home, destroying property, threatening people, things like that. Those would be automatic reasons for the young adult to leave the home. And do as much as you can as a young adult is living at home to foster responsibility and independence, where they have to step up and take responsibility. I often talk about creating a home environment that mimics the young adult, what the young adult would have if they moved into an apartment with friends. So there's one school of thought is that you make it very uncomfortable at home. Put a bed in a closet and say, okay, there's your bedroom. I'm more inclined to say create an environment where they do the wash, they have a microwave, a basement kind of apartment, and they're expected to work and contribute money and cook dinners, participate in cooking dinners. At some point, they're going to say, well, I could do all this in an apartment on my own. I wouldn't have to hear you talking to me or complaining about my playing Xbox or whatever. Yeah, well, then that's a simple, it's a more easy transition then into that apartment. We talked about alienation. If your young adult is not talking to you, it's a cutoff type of relationship. And please don't stop loving. Understand that they're hurting. There's something that's unresolved there. Try to identify the cause, and if you can address that through apology, forgiveness, you need to do that. Don't stop attempting to reach out, but respect their wishes. I think at least contacts around holidays and birthdays, I think are appropriate, even though they may not appreciate your weekly, emails. Here's FYI, here's an interesting job you might like to look at. So if they say they don't want that, that's fine, but then you still need to reach out on those special occasions. You want them to know you still are thinking about them and still love them. And then we hold them in our mind and our hearts and prayers. I mean, this is such a tough situation because you're grieving the loss of someone who's still alive, and you can't have contact with them. It's more complicated, I would say, almost more complicated than a death. And then we prepare to welcome them back with open arms. I mean, always keep the door open. One of my favorite stories in the New Testament, next to the Good Samaritan, is the prodigal son. The father welcomes the son back who had turned his back on the family and just said, I'm doing my own thing and forget you. And I'm sure that there was little communication by the prodigal son when he was out, you know, on his own. So always keep your door open. So let's talk a little bit about disabilities. I think it's important to understand the disability that you're dealing with. So there's lots of resources in the community, whether this be a learning disability, a mental disability, physical disability. Tap into the resources in the community. The state has a lot of resources in this regard. And then build a comprehensive approach. Bring lots of people in to help with the process. I had one parent, set of parents who were trying to help their son who is on the spectrum, the autistic spectrum disorder range, and has some ADHD issues. They were trying to teach him to drive, and it just was not going well. The parents were way too anxious, and that made the child anxious. Or when the child was feeling like he wanted to drive, then he got anxious. So it just wasn't working. And they were able to find a volunteer from the church who took this young adult and taught him how to drive. And at the end of the day, he got his license, which was on the first try, which was really a tremendous accomplishment. Always think about the 4 I's. If you remember these: identity, independence, intimacy, and intention. Intention is purpose. Try to think about what issues, how can I help this young adult advance in all 4 of those areas? And have a vision for them. Talk about a vision of where they can go, and try to, our words are powerful, and we can have a vision about our young adults, even with disabilities. And I'd argue that many parents of young adults with disabilities are a little bit hesitant about pushing or having expectations that might be a little beyond where the young adult is capable of going. But I'd argue that I think it's always good to have realistic vision, but stretch. Okay, here's what we think we can do, but maybe could do even beyond that, and stretch the young adult. And in some cases, it's a matter of facing the reality of a future with a level of investment with the young adult. Maybe the young adult is in the home. Maybe the young adult is set up in an apartment. If they need to go on, if they qualify for Social Security, maybe that's a direction that needs to be pursued. Maybe you support them in a group home, or support them in an independent living situation. So I think it's kind of facing the reality of what the limitations are for that young adult with disabilities. So mental health and substance abuse, these are really complicating problems that I think just exacerbate any kind of difficulty in letting go in the launch process for both young adults and parents. Obviously, if the young adult is receptive to getting some help for either of these conditions, then this is the number one thing that a parent should do: help support that, and financially, or drive the person there. Do whatever you can to get that person to build a trusting relationship with a professional in the community that take some of the pressure off you as parents to be able to answer or respond to all the issues that the young adult has. You can say, hey, maybe you need to talk to your therapist about that. If the young adult is not receptive to professional help, get help for yourself. Help, contact somebody like myself who works with parents, and get the help you need to be able to manage the situation with the young adult. Um, so don't just say, well, he won't get any help, so nothing can be done. I end up operating in kind of a parental coach role with parents who have young adults with substance abuse problems or mental health problems. Continue to love in the face of rejection of help and establish certain expectations. If they're at home, I mentioned earlier, there's some deal breakers. They cannot stay at home if they continue to violate these rules. I had a young man who continued to bring drugs into the family. There's some evidence that he was selling drugs, put the family at risk. It was one of the deal breakers. And finally, the father had to take this young adult and drop him at a young adult facility, home of some sort that the county had for young adults. It was a very hard decision to do, but there was no way that they could continue to just allow him to have these behaviors at home. If he's outside, he or she's outside the home, then limit of money and resources becomes important. But I think at the end of the day, my argument was never give up on our kids, not just for their sake, but for ours. We love our kids. We're hardwired to love our kids, and to say I'm going to cut off from this child because this young adult has given me such grief that I'm going to try to protect myself from feeling anything anymore and stop loving this kid is really going to hurt you as a parent if you try to take that approach. Painful as it is, we need to keep working at loving our young adults. Sometimes we have to pick our battles. I talk a lot with parents about who struggle with whether I give in and then I'm mad at myself for giving in, or in other occasions I say no and then I feel guilty that I should have given in. So is there a third path? Yeah, I think you can play to the strengths of the person. What would be helpful that would tap into their strengths. You can work with them to generate possible solutions other than one or the other that you're dealing with. Find a shared solution, compromise with both being invested in the solution. And sometimes just delaying and asking for time to think about it helps you to kind of go back, step back, reflect on what's the loving and right thing to do. And ultimately, we need to say goodbye. And letting go is really a grieving process. It starts when they start toddling and they start walking, and then that first stage when they go off to school, and you kind of drop to your knees as they get on the bus. And you pray that they'll just be safe. You worry a lot about them. You're sad about seeing them go. Of course, after a couple summers, then you drop to your knees and thank God that they're getting on the bus and going back, because it's time for them to go. But then there's transitions all the way, junior high, high school is a transition into college. They leave home for a period of time, and then college moves on to living on their own. So these are all transition points, but they're points at which we have to say goodbye to our kids and to grieve their process of moving forward. I'm big on writing letters, and I encourage parents to write a letter saying goodbye. That would include apologies, opportunities for apologies, for forgiveness, ways that we see our young adult strengths, their value, why they matter to us, expressions of unconditional love. and hopes for their future. And in this case, more general happiness, success in life, as they would like to define that, not our definition of that. I encourage people to do this in a handwritten form, and then even go and if you're willing, it could be a little bit uncomfortable, but read this to your young adult and then give them a copy of this. I'd say keep a copy for yourself because they may get mad at some point and tear it up. But they will have that record. This is a record that says this is the saying goodbye, but I want you to know how much I love you and I value you. In the last book, which is Growing Apart, that I wrote, again, it's on Amazon, as well as the book Parenting with Love and Backbone. I share the letter I wrote to my son, and as an example of this letter of saying goodbye. So you want to do this for your son or daughter, and do it for yourself. A little bit of a typo there. This gives expression to the love that we have, and it's important for us to express that. How do we measure love and backbone? Well, we can't use the measurement of the young adult's behavior. If we go back to the first webinar I did, and where I said we can't control the young adult, we're not responsible for the young adult, so we can't let them then judge us as to whether we're doing a good job or not. Our young adults' behaviors, since we can't control it, their expectations we have our sons or daughters, we can't use that as the basis for measuring our effectiveness as parents. What we can use is our actions. Have we operated in love? At the end of the day, you can look in the mirror and you can ask yourself these questions. Have I done this in love? Have my actions been consistent with my principles and values? Have I been willing to change and look at myself? Have I been willing to take action to address any wounds or past offenses that have occurred? And are my actions in line with supporting independence? So that's a report card for a parent right there, that you can look in the mirror and say, how have I done on this? And finally, just the importance of self-care. The old statement of put your own mask on first, take care of yourself first, and then take care of your son or daughter. So if you're just burned out and not taking care of yourself, exercise, nutrition, sleep, you're going to be overreactive to your young adult and not particularly helpful. Get support from spouse, friends, associations, caregiver groups, and protect your marriage. Be sure that you two are working together. If you're in a marriage, that you work together, that you integrate love and backbone. You sit down and look at each other and say, how do we present a united front that reflects both love and backbone? Establish boundaries, what time, space, effort, resources you will and will not give to your young adult. You can't let your young adult take over or run the family or your lives, so that you drop everything for whatever the young adult wants. It's not fair to you, and it doesn't set a good example for your young adult of understanding that there's limits and boundaries and consequences in life. And get help from extended family and professional help. I said, if the young adult's struggling and they're saying, I don't have a problem, it's your problem, and they're not moving ahead, then get some help for yourself. Okay, thank you very much.